Another component that is very similar to a checkbox is the radio button. So back in the Angular material website, under components page, let's go to form controls and look at this radio button. So as a quick tip, whenever you want to work with a component, look at this overview tab. Here you should see a very simple example of using that component. So here's our radio button. Now, if you click this, view source, you can see the markup that you need to write to render this component. So here we have two elements, MD radio group and MD radio button. So we can put all these radio buttons inside a group, and in that group, only one radio button will be selectable. And of course, we can have multiple groups on a web page. So back in VS Code, I'm going to delete this checkbox here. Instead, we need MD-radio-group. And inside this, we need two radio buttons, MD-radio-button times 2. Beautiful. Now here we can give each button a label, like male and female. We can give them a value. We can hardcode the value here, or use property binding syntax and bind this to a field or property in our component. Now, similarly, I'm going to set a value here. We also have all those properties you learned about in the last lecture. So we have checked. We can hardcode this here, or use property binding and bind this to isChecked field in our component. Save. Back in the browser. We got a blank screen. So let's take a look at the console. Now this error is a little bit distracting. It says can't bind to checked since it isn't a known property of MD radio button. Unfortunately, the errors in Angular material are still a little bit immature. So what's going on here? Back in the code, I'm going to temporarily delete this bit of code. Save. Back in the browser. We don't have any errors anymore. But if you look at the web page, you don't see the radio buttons. The reason for this is because we didn't import the module for this radio button. Now, technically, I expect to see an error like MD radio group is not a known element. But we don't get that error. It turns out that there is something common between the checkbox and the radio modules. So because in app module, we imported this MD checkbox module, we don't get that error saying that this radio group or radio button is not a known element. If I comment this out, see what happens. Back in the browser. Okay, now we got a blank screen. And if you look in the console, you see the error I was talking about. So MD radio button is not a known element. So here's the lesson. Whenever you want to use a component, make sure to import its module first. So back in the documentation for the radio button, look at the API tab. Here's the module that we need to import, MD radio module. So back in the app module, I'm going to import another module from Angular/material. That is MD radio module. And then let's add a line break here. Okay. So then in the imports array, we're going to have the checkbox module and the radio module. Now, something I need to clarify here. In this demo, I'm not using a checkbox. So technically, we should not import this MD checkbox module. But I'm deliberately leaving this here because later I want to show you a technique to refactor our code. So we imported our radio module. Now, back in the browser, these are our beautiful radio buttons. So now back in the app component, I was going to use this property binding here to automatically check the female radio button. Let's test this. Back in the browser, so we can see female is checked by default. Now, if you look at the documentation for this radio button, here you can see the MD radio group class or MD radio group component, here we have an input property called value. So we can set the value of the group, and this will automatically check the radio button with that value. For example, back here, I'm going to remove this checked property. So the value of the female radio button is 0. I can set the value of the group to 0, and this will automatically check the female radio button. And once again, the female radio button is checked. So you can see these components in Angular material are very easy to use.